Howdy. This is Mission Texas,
a political podcast about winning Texas by 2032, or else we may lose the White House for a generation.
I'm one of your hosts, Alex Clark.
And I am Kate Rumsey.
Other podcasts may focus on the day-to-day or the next election, but we are keeping the eyes of Texas on the bigger prize. What happens after the next census?
Welcome to Mission Texas. We have not one, but two guests here today to help us break down the Texas primaries. Our first guest, you are probably reading her Substack if you're a listener of our podcast. She is the writer of Lone Star Left. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle Davis.
Thank you for having me, Kate and Alex.
Yes, and I'm so excited to introduce my good friend, David De La Fuente. He's a Dallas-based political operative who did not have any clients on the ballot this time around. Very important disclaimer. David and I go way back. Maybe the most important thing about David, he has a valid claim for being responsible for being married to my wife. He convinced her to go to a Texas College Democrats conference where we met. We were both running for statewide office that year. He was going to be the political director and I was going to be the communications director. And it's very good that we were unopposed because I ended up flirting with her that whole time. Anyways, the next year he went on to become president and I was his vice president. And he was one of my groomsmen at that wedding. So welcome to the pod, David. Oh, and also everyone, you should check out his podcast, Loserville. It's about the city of Dallas primarily.
Yeah, it's our podcast with Philip Kingston is about how neither one of us are good people versus like this is a mission-based podcast. So I think your listeners get a little bit more out of it.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Well, I'm good friends with Phil, so tell him hello. We love supporting other writers and podcasters, especially on this. But that's a little bit of your origin story. Michelle, we like to start all of our podcasts with everyone's origin story before we get into the meat of this podcast, which is about the primary. So Michelle, and then maybe David, tell us a little bit about how you got into Texas politics and also how you started writing Lone Star Left.
Oh my gosh. You know, every time somebody asks me this, it's like the most boring story ever in the world. And I start telling it, and just like I'm telling it now, everybody's faces glaze over. And it's really not an exciting story at all.
No.
I love writing. I love politics. I've been in Texas politics, influencing space since like 2013. I started my blog in 2020. I rebranded to Lone Star Left in 2022. And that's just what I do. And it's my passion.
If people knew you before Lone Star Left, what would they have known you as?
Living blue in Texas.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, we've been around quite a while. Started on Facebook and just kind of branched out from there.
And so, David, I knew you as an Austin College kangaroo and you were an SMU Mustang, but I assume you'd probably gotten involved in politics before then?
Yeah. I was always interested in politics. I grew up in Dallas, in the city, specifically in like the North Oak Cliff area, which is where I currently live with my wife and two boys. Again, like always interested. I was in high school during like the 2006 wave. So I actually like went and knocked on doors with Judge Ernest West when he first ran for office. I knew his son because I went to elementary school and middle school and even high school with him. And, got the bug then and like just kept on going essentially. But it was amazing to, be involved during that like 2006 wave. For folks that aren't aware, like it is when Dallas like really turned Democratic, turned blue, and hasn't really looked back.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think people forget how far we've come in politics, especially in this area. So let's just like dive into the primaries. I want to get y'all's take. Like, what is the biggest thing that you saw, or maybe was a surprise from the big turnout to the people who won? Michelle?
So I don't think it was necessarily as much as a surprise as it was to me, as it was to a lot of other people. So if you have really been paying attention to Democratic politics in Texas over the last few years, you might have noticed that there has been a rise of progressivism in Texas. You would see it through, the Democratic Party, particularly like their platform. They just elected a new progressive chair. In the last convention, they elected mostly a progressive SDEC board across the SDEC caucus. I don't know what they're called, the SDEC chamber.
Board.
Yeah, board. And you see this with different candidates coming up across the state. You see a lot of progressive candidates in this particular election. So James Talarico, he, I think, really spoke to the progressive populism that we see, rising in this state, and that has been rising for several years. We saw Taylor Remmett, run on the same type of messaging in Fort Worth just a couple months ago and win like overwhelmingly. 30 points, 33 points or something like that. And Talarico run on the same message. And when the white vote, the Hispanic vote, and then, Jasmine Crockett, such a big name and a progressive in her own right, both of them got more Democratic votes than anybody in history. And it was just very, very, very exciting primary. And I think that we have a big, big year ahead of us.
Progressive and young, I would point out.
Very
so
young.
You mentioned Kendall Scudder, our state party chairman, James Talarico. These are contemporaries of me and David. I mean, we're talking about 36-year-olds across the board here. That's pretty amazing. Kind of our time.
Not my contemporary, apparently. Yeah, thanks.
Look, I wasn't going to point that out, Kate, but
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I'm just and beyond that, Christian Carranza, one of our first guests down in San Antonio, Junior Isanu, beating a power player, Chris Turner. I mean,
yeah, and that's actually my district
really?
that I live in. So that was an interesting race. But I mean, we are seeing a lot of like really young candidates, in Texas 18, which I'm sure that we'll get around to talking about with Christian Menifee. And, you're right, because I think James Talarico is like 35, 36. Kendall Scudder's 35, Christian Menifee's, in his late 30s. So we are seeing a lot of like younger candidates come up. Junior, I'm trying to think. In HD 41 in the border, Julio is, I think,
he's in the runoff, right?
Right, he's in the runoff. He's very young. So I would agree that there's a lot of youth energy in Texas right now.
How about you, David? What's your big takeaway from the primaries?
Yeah, no, I think the massive voter turnout in the Democratic primary is kind of shocking. I don't think a lot of people really saw it at this level coming. I think we all knew it was going to be higher than, 2024, 2022, 2018, but it really just skyrocketed in a way that midterm primaries typically don't, especially in a state like Texas. I mean, we're talking about the fact that there are, hundreds of thousands of people that are probably Dem leaning, not strong partisans, but soft Dems, Dem leaning independents, pure independents that did not vote in the, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg primary back in 2020. And then they decided to come out for James Talarico versus Jasmine Crockett. That kind of midterm primary turning out at a rate much higher than a presidential primary, especially a contested presidential primary when the presidential nomination was still very much in flux, is quite frankly, shocking. I do think, the surge in voter turnout is people that have historically voted in general elections, even some that have voted in Republican primaries before in the past. How much of that is, Alex can attest to this, as like growing up in a place like Sherman, like
I was just
how
gonna
many of
say.
those past Republican primary voters are Democrats voting in local primaries versus how much of it is like actually converts. Like hard to tell at this point, but like if you look at like a Dallas, Texas, like the amount of past Republican primary voters voting in this Dem primary was lower than what we saw in like the statewide average, for instance. And it's because, if you're an indie here, you're probably possibly already voting in Dem primaries, so it was interesting. The surge of new voters, I really only have data for Dallas, not so much the state, though others like Derek Ryan have put that out. But between what I've seen from Ryan and what I've done myself, it really looks like the surge was unusually young, and young in voting tends to mean like under 50. So in that sense, like we are
Yes,
a part of
under
it.
50. Woo!
But like when the median primary or voter is like in their 60s, like the fact that the surge is happening, in like the 20s, 30s, 40s range is a big deal. The surge was also disproportionately Latino and Asian, which is very interesting. The Latino and Asian vote shares, at least here in Dallas County, were their highest ever in a primary, which I think is part of how James Talarico did so well in Dallas County compared to a lot of the pre-election prognostications. Like actually, Alex, I don't think we talked about this, but like I gave a prediction of where I thought Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico were going to end up in Dallas County, and I overestimated Crockett by about 5 points.
Yeah.
I was closer to 6. Um, and I just yeah. I thought she was going to do better here, but I also was like very clear as I was telling people, I was like, she's not hitting her win margins in Dallas County. Like it was very apparent by the end of early vote that she was in deep trouble in Dallas County, and it turned out to be deeper trouble than even I predicted.
Yeah, and to be clear, like there were Dallas County irregularities, but I don't think it could
Yeah.
make up 5 to 6%. I just wanted to quickly,
No.
before we lost the thread here, you mentioned like people I grew up with in Sherman and things like that. Just I can speak anecdotally. Yes, I have had an in-law who has told me that to vote for the judges in his area, he's voted in Republican primary, so he can feel like he has some control over what's going on in his professional life. My brother, he donated to a political candidate for the first time. It was James Talarico. My uncle, who I I know, like in my mind, is like default identity is conservative because he had like a Rush Limbaugh book at his house growing up, who told me he was so excited and thrilled to vote for James Talarico. So at least anecdotally, I know that there are some things happening at the margins where people are, I don't want to say deprogrammed, or they're showing up on the sidelines who maybe weren't engaged before, but it's hard to not think there's some of that going on with just the sheer volume of people who are voting. And also like you said, the people who only had a general election history or maybe some Republican primary history.
Let me ask this though. What do y'all make of that? Is it because we had such a strong choice in the top of the ticket? Do you think it's a referendum on Trump? Is it because we had somebody to vote for in every election, which we hadn't had in a lot of years? Is it a combination of all those things? Because I think, as you're saying, David, that like I was paying attention to Tarrant County because a lot of my friends are running out there. I live close to Tarrant County, even though I'm in Dallas. And I know, Michelle, you were commenting on Chris Tackett's data he was putting out, the See It, Name It, Fight It. I think that's the name. He was talking about Tarrant County and the just surge of people coming out. And I think they were telling me that they saw a lot of people who were crossing over, like past our voters from a primary history, or never had voted in a primary before. And they were wondering and just guessing, like, are these people that had a choice finally in Tarrant County? And maybe they had voted in like Republican primaries before because they had a choice there and they didn't have one in the Democratic primary. So I'm wondering what y'all's thoughts are, especially Michelle, given the fact that you're in Tarrant.
I think that is definitely part of it because, for so many years, like so many years, people have been, I vote in Republican primaries because there's never Democrats on my ballot. And I just want to get the less of the crazies, basically. And this is the first year we've had Democrats on the ballot in every single race, pretty much. And I would say most counties, even down to the judges and the commissioners. So I would say that there's a lot of that going on. I would also say it's a referendum of Trump. And I would say also that there's a lot of misconceptions about Talarico, about, and just a kind of what we were talking about before we got online, as far as, what he is saying, his message, right? Is he appealing to disenchanted voters for Trump or to moderates, or is he just using simple language? Is he just using language that everyday voters can understand? And I think that's what it is. I think that Talarico is definitely running on a progressive platform, but he's using language that, everyday people with the average American being, having a 6th grade education can understand. And whether they're, I grew up a conservative. My family's been conservative, so that's what I've always been. Even though I've never voted in my whole life, I've just considered myself a conservative. Now I'm voting for Talarico, that type of situation. Like, we have to remember that there are millions and millions of people in Texas that have just never voted. I think that's also a big part of it too.
David, what do you think?
I think a lot of the increase in voter turnout was driven by Talarico and Crockett, especially given that there were, exciting down ballot candidates that, were well funded, had grassroots support. But quite frankly, they are going to go and target past primary voters because that's what they should be doing and what we always do. And so this influx of new Democratic primary voters is probably driven by what they're seeing at the average person level, whether it be TV ads, social media presence, on the ground stuff that they're seeing in their community between Talarico and Crockett. And I think that is where we started to see some of the weird down ballot results, perhaps. Like HD 101 is a great example of this, where it's like there were 2 actually very solid candidates. Like, Junior is going to be a great state representative, as much as, I think most Democrats in the state love Chris Turner and what he was down in the ledge. Like, Junior is going to be great. Yeah, very impressive. Versus there are other down ballot primaries, like I can name at least 2 in Dallas, where I think it is kind of concerning, like who won. And like, if you look at how early versus election day versus mail broke out and like what precincts they won in and things like that, it looks like it was like the surge voters that possibly put them over the top. And, obviously we all want more people voting, but it is kind of concerning that some down ballot races went in a way that probably isn't best for their communities.
David, let's just get into it.
Yeah.
I know who you're talking about. Let's talk about it. We had a very surprising result here in Dallas County. We have a new district attorney.
Yeah.
Most likely, but yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Probably. 99.9% chance she wins. Yeah.
Well, before we get into that, I think just what we were talking about earlier is Chris Turner, who's been a long member of the state ledge. He is known as a mentor and party leadership. My friend Cassandra Hernandez, who beat me in my race, she was telling me how much of a great mentor he is to a lot of them. And so that's a big surprise that not only he had a primary challenger with Junior, who was a Grand Prairie council member, but also that he won, and I think when you're seeing these surprising results, as we're getting into the DA's race here in Dallas, a lot of times I hear a lot of folks, and it's sort of this old adage that when people don't know who to vote for, they'll vote for a female. And so, you're seeing that result potentially in the DA's race, but with Junior versus Chris Turner, a very long-standing member of the ledge, and then you've got a member of the Grand Prairie Council. It's like, well, what happened there? And so is it informed voters or are people guessing? Like, it's just hard to know. I'm assuming it's just informed voters. Maybe Michelle, you'll tell us wrong, but differently. But I think that with regard to the DA's race, as we'll talk about, you got John Creusot, long-standing member of our party. He's been a DA for several terms, I'm assuming at this point, and he lost to what is potentially a problematic judge who's got issues with allegations of like ethical issues, which I'm assuming David knows a lot more than me. So anyways, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on either of those races, but I wanted to make sure for our listeners, if they're not from the Dallas or North Texas area, that they knew what that was about.
Well, they both fit the model of the younger, more progressive, at least perceived to be younger, more progressive option, right?
Yeah. Except
Yeah.
I would say Junior's is more like genuine, if I'm being blunt. You know,
he has, very authentic, very great presence online. He seems to really know what he's doing.
So for the 101 district, I could speak to that, because this is, where I live. I know both these guys. Both of these races were very, very, very active. Chris spent a lot of money. Every other commercial, every other YouTube ad. I mean, he spent a lot of money on this race. And so did Junior. Junior had a fantastic ground game. We had signs up, we had door knockers. So I would say these were informed voters. And, like when you drove through my neighborhood, somebody called me a county chair, a friend of mine, a couple counties out, and she's like, "Are you seeing any signs up?" I'm like, "Yeah, all over my neighborhood. It's Junior Chris, Junior Chris, Junior Chris." And that's really how it was. Like, I thought this race could go either way. I think that in this case that demographics definitely played a role. So this district is like 25% white. And I think it's like a lot of people looked at Chris as like, kind of old shoe. I mean, no offense to Chris. Everybody loves Chris. I mean, he's the experienced older guy. But I think like with this time, especially like with what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, there's this like overall narrative that we want like the old generation out and the new generation in, and we want people who are going to like really kick ass for new things because maybe the older people aren't fighting hard enough. And so whether that's true or not, that narrative was there. And so I think that was like a big impact on this race for sure.
Yeah. And then I want to be clear, like I didn't super follow this race. So like Michelle knows way more than I do. But one thing that did stand out to me also is that, as Kate mentioned, names on the ballot matter. So like in a place like Dallas, female names have like a huge built-in advantage. And the same is true generally of names that show their ethnicity. So Garza is a great example of that. Like if your last name is Garza, like you're going to do really well in heavily Latino precincts. Junior is Isanu. His name is from recent African immigration, and those names actually typically have a disadvantage. So the fact that he was able to overcome that is very impressive.
David, I think this might be a good time to talk about the TX 33 race and how I think Quintanilla outperforming our guest, Zishan Hafiz. To me, that was surprising. I don't know what you think about it, because you probably predicted this, actually.
I had texted a mutual friend of ours, Stuart, a few weeks before the election, and I was like, I think Carlos is finishing in third, like genuinely, and especially as early votes started hitting, and it's like if you're going to see like a surge of Latino voters who are probably coming out for Talarico, like if you look at like the data of like TX 33, the results, all that kind of stuff, they're probably coming out for James, and they probably have not voted in Democratic primaries before. Like they probably voted for Carlos. Like I'm digging into like precinct data at the Texas 33 level and trying to match precincts with total results and all this. Like I think Carlos Quintanilla cleared 40% of the Latino vote.
So I love giving context for our listeners. Texas 33 is the redrawn 33. That was Mark Veazey, who then had Colin Allred, Julie Johnson, Zishan Hafiz, and Quintanilla. And Michelle Davis, she endorsed Zishan. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Michelle. We had Julie on, we had Zishan on, we asked Colin Allred to come on, or reached out to his folks,
Still
and we
welcome.
didn't hear back. He's still welcome. But I'm wondering your thoughts, Michelle, because you were heavily in favor of Zishan.
Yeah, what a disappointment that was. I don't know what happened. I guess if you don't have it, if you don't have ground game, at the end it's gonna matter.
I actually think it's like the opposite here, because Johnson and Haviz had ground games. They had volunteers. They had people going door to door. Ironically, it was Allred who finished in first that didn't really value any of that. He didn't do door to door canvassing for the most part.
I think it was name ID.
Yeah. Name ID and the millions of dollars he raised in the Senate race last cycle.
Yeah. Because, I mean, if you look at like the money raised and the money spent, Allred in the House campaign spent over $4 million, but he only brought in 1.1 million. And that's because, as Alex mentioned, he was able to transfer all the Senate money over. So actually, one of the big questions for the runoff for me is Allred had all this money in the primary, massively outspent his opponents, but was extremely weak on fundraising once he switched races. He has the last FEC report pre-primary, the 20-day out report, showed that he had under $1 million cash on hand. And I don't know if he's able to reload. Versus Julie Johnson is a decent fundraiser, better fundraiser than Colin Allred is. It might be a runoff where Julie now has the financial advantage.
Well, and I wonder, for the special elections, the runoffs, it tends to bring out voters who vote consistently and in primaries and in runoffs. And those are very informed voters. They're very active voters. And they're not ones that are just going to be voting based on name ID, like knowing who Colin is. Maybe they didn't know Julie because it was a new district. And so I was making the case to some of our mutual friends, because I support Julie, very open about that it may help her in that kind of race, because she can overcome that with a lot of deep roots, because she is very well known and liked amongst the groups who may not be super happy with some of the things that she's always voted for or the things that she's aligned herself with in the past, but they appreciate that she's available to them, that she talks to them, that she comes out and supports everybody. And so I think that will really be to her advantage.
It'll certainly be a different electorate. My question is, how does that electorate, because you're right, it's a different crowd that shows up. How is that going to play out in a race like Texas 18, where we have a young Christian Menifee versus Al Green, who is like a long time incumbent in this new seat that's been drawn in this crazy mid-decade redistricting?
Yeah, so Texas 18, they are fried. They are frazzled. I mean, this is one district that has been through the ringer as far as special elections, like over and over and over. So like we're talking like voter fatigue central for this district. So anybody who is in a district that doesn't have a special election and, has like extra time to do like phone calls or something and wants an election to work on, I would send my energy that way. But I think the Houston Progressive Caucus is getting behind Christian Menifee, as they did during the primary. And we'll help him out with like block walking and phone banking and things like that. And that should put him over the edge. The Houston Progressive Caucus, I don't know their member count as of like right off the top of my head. They're very active in the Houston area, and they've done a lot to help progressives get elected, not only city, but also like in precincts. So my personal preference is hopefully they'll get Christian Menifee across the finish line. No shade on Al Green. I love Al Green, but we definitely we want to see the youth.
And that is the distinction, right? Like platform wise, I don't know a ton about the candidates, but I have to assume their platforms aren't
like
terribly
identical.
Different, right? Yeah. But there's a huge difference in age. And more than just wanting youth and vigor, we've also seen the practical consequences of having older members of Congress, right? That's partly why we're in this mess in the first place, right? Like, can we give some background for those who might know?
And that's the thing, like with Texas at 18, you had Sheila Jackson Lee, who passed away in that seat. And then they went a very, very, very long stretch of time before they got in Sylvester Turner. And then Sylvester Turner was in that seat for like a month, and then he passed away. Both Sheila Jackson Lee and Sylvester Turner were like 80 years old.
Incredible public servants, but old.
We love them. They were great public servants. They were, fought for civil rights, and they fought for a lot of things for Houston, and they will forever be remembered as, titans. But they died in office, and after Sylvester Turner passed away, Texas 18 went an entire year without representation. Then Menifee got elected. Then they redrew the districts. And Al Green decided, let's run in 18 with Christian Menifee. And so now they're running against each other.
Exhausting. Just listening to it is exhausting. I can't imagine living through it.
Yeah, one interesting thing for context is on the days that Sheila Jackson Lee and Sylvester Turner were born, Al Green was already alive. Al Green is actually the oldest of the three, if all three were still alive.
Wow. But he still has that, like, I don't know. You still see him at the State of the Union and all the other things. Like, he's such a fighter. I don't know. I
You're
definitely
being kind, Kate. I will not be kind.
being kind.
I am an ageist with a capital A, to quote one of my favorite comedians, Hassan Minhaj. Look,
if we have older listeners out
we
there,
have older listeners, and I'm sorry, I don't know that all of y'all need to be running for office.
but anyways, but I think it is an interesting. I'm sure they're all exhausted. I've seen it. I'm exhausted for them. But maybe to pivot a little bit, what do you make of all the people who came in kind of last minute for these statewide races and have kind of surprised us and outperformed? Like, I'm specifically thinking of Marcus Velez. And then, Tony Box had a pretty good showing with the AG's race, and it threw it into a runoff. So I know, Michelle, you talked to a lot of those people. Like, how are you perceiving those races as we get into the runoffs?
Okay, so a lot of these races that came in at the last minute, like there was like an influx of like union people that came in the last minute, and I don't know if they came in together or they came in with Jasmine Crockett. I'm not 100% sure. So Tony Box, I actually never got a chance to talk to him. I wish I did. It just never connected.
Yeah.
I tried. But we did wind up with a runoff, and I actually predicted a runoff between Jaworski and Johnson. I did endorse Jaworski. I thought they would be a lot closer. I am surprised Johnson was as far as ahead as he was. He does have a history of, some more kind of middle of the road votes and donors. But I think Jaworski took kind of like a negative tone in his campaign, which kind of pushed some people kind of off. It was kind of like off-putting. So
I will say it was the first time I had ever seen a negative yard sign. Yeah, I was in Austin.
He had a negative yard sign.
I was in Austin on some professional business, and I was getting a ride to where I was going, and I saw a big yard sign for Joe Jaworski, and then right next to it, it had like an attack ad style yard sign being anti Nathan Johnson. It was like very clearly like a duo that was together, and I was like, that's a first for me. I've never seen anything like that.
See him in the Republican primaries. They're fun.
I think that if Jaworski changes his tune and can focus on policy in the runoff, that he has a better chance. But if he remains on the negative side, then probably Johnson will stay in the lead. As far as the AG's or the lieutenant governor's race, I don't know. It's hard to say because, Vicki Goodwin, she's so, I wouldn't say polished, because she's really, really good on policy and she knows her stuff. She knows
Right.
policy and law in and out. And she's just very like matter of fact. And I think that she should get like a mohawk and like a leather jacket. I think that might, spunk her up a little bit.
She needs a little bit of an edge, is what you're saying.
A little bit of an edge. Yeah.
Well, she is a 2018 seat flipper, which we appreciate.
Yeah, like she's really great. She's really smart. She really knows her stuff, but she doesn't have the same type of like pizzazz that Marcos has, if that makes sense. But on the other hand, Marcos doesn't know the legislator in and out, and I'm not sure he can like recite laws right off the top of his head like Vicky can. So, it's kind of like the yin and the yang, they'd probably be great, like if they were the same person, like if you smushed them together. So I think it'll be interesting to see because they're just two very opposites and there's pros and cons for each. And I think those are our only two statewide runoffs, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Jasmine. I mean, what did you make of her coming in at that point? Because I know, having run before, that there's a lot to be said of when you announce and when you decide to run and when you file. And sometimes you want a lead time so you can put other people away and say, like, I don't, try to like thwart other people to come in, and you raise a lot of money and it kind of persuades others to not run. And yet she waited on the exact day. And I'm wondering, is it because she was trying to set up her successor, or I don't know, like I'm wondering what y'all's thoughts are on that.
So I read, and I read a lot of articles, and I don't remember where I've read this now, about what went wrong in her race. And one of the things that I read was that the reason she was so unprepared for this primary is that she expected to coast through it and have the real fight be in the general election. She didn't think that she had the, serious challenge that she had with Talarico. And, knowing that, like, it really kind of really makes sense if that was her mindset, like, oh, it's Talarico, it's nobody, it's not serious, If that was her mindset, then that really kind of actually makes a lot of sense why things kind of played out the way that they did.
I know, and I read that she didn't have really a campaign manager. Is that right? I mean,
I read that as well.
Yeah.
And I don't think that she did. I personally reached out to her campaign several times in December. I was not successful, but I don't think that, it's hard to run it. It's hard to run a campaign in Texas. It's really hard. And it's especially hard as a Democrat because we don't have a model of here's what it takes in the 21st century to run a successful campaign as a Democrat in Texas. So whatever it takes to win as a Democrat in Texas, you have to figure it out. You're starting from scratch. You figure it out. You can figure out by like looking at Republicans have done, try to figure it out that way, or just figure out a new model, and I think everybody's just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure it out as they go along. And she didn't get it right,
In Jasmine's defense, I think she probably meant it whenever Talarico called at the beginning of the race and asked her if she was going to run for it. I think he probably wouldn't have run if she said yes at that point. Like you said, like the timing of all this matters. But in Jasmine's defense, Representative Crockett, right? She did not know that she wasn't going to be representing her seat for another couple of years. I think she originally said she wanted to run against Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
The kind of circumstances outside of her control kind of left her in the political wilderness because her seat wasn't her seat anymore.
Oh, but I mean, she would have easily won that primary.
You mean the one where Reverend Haynes?
Yeah. I mean, like she set him up to walk into that seat. I don't know if that's why she waited until the last day to file, but her waiting until the last day to file meant that, Reverend Haynes essentially got that seat for free, without having a real primary. I think he'll be a good member of Congress, but I mean, there wasn't a primary there.
It's kind of the model for how she got into her seat too, right? She was endorsed by Eddie Bernice Johnson. She endorsed Freddie Haynes.
But she had a challenger. She had Jane Hamilton, and that's what I was curious about, like whether Eddie Bernice Johnson gave them lead time, or maybe she regrets the fact that she had a challenger in that race, even though Eddie Bernice
Rocket got pulled
Johnson.
into a runoff.
Yeah, so Eddie Bernie Swanson did endorse her, I believe, officially and set her up, but had challengers in that race.
Yeah.
That's my curiosity of the timing of all of this.
Yeah. There was also, I mean, Allred was running for Senate. He drops out on the last day, switches to Texas 33. There was obviously like some things happening behind the scenes, and then obviously like it is exceptionally strange from the federal level, like outside of Texas, that if you live in like Dallas, you essentially had a Senate and House primary occurring simultaneously where two sets of candidates essentially endorsed each other. Talarico and Julie Johnson were co-endorsing each other, and Crockett and Allred were co-endorsing each other as well. And that's
Zishan in our interview pushed back on that. Actually, he said there was never an official endorsement the other direction, that Crockett never endorsed Allred. That was just kind of assumed.
okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess you could claim it was not official, but it was also when you're doing press conferences, when you're doing joint press conferences and events, like okay. But I mean, like Crockett, I mean, like I think when she showed her team's polling to Allred and Talarico, she was able to scare out Allred. She was not able to scare out Talarico. I think their campaign kept the faith that they could turn the numbers around. I was quite frankly shocked how the Crockett campaign just did not take the primary election seriously until it was essentially too late. They let Talarico go up on TV and other paid media essentially unanswered for 4 weeks or so, which is crazy. I mean, it's not what any real campaign structure would do, especially when Crockett had $5 million plus. Like this is not a case. Like she's an exceptionally strong fundraiser. She had a lot of money, cash on hand. And I'm really curious, how much money during the next FEC report she's going to report on hand. Like, how much did they leave in the bank unspent because they just did not really see Talarico as a threat? And I think, to the point that Michelle has made earlier, like Talarico's campaign was about ideas and they had an extreme message discipline. Like I think all of us could tell you the 15-second Talarico pitch. Crockett, even if you love her, there was no 15-second pitch. There was no 15-second message as to why she was running. And I think that is probably what did her in, combined with the fact that, again, Talarico was up on TV early. He had volunteers doing normal volunteer stuff, like harassing me and my wife via text message to vote for him, which is not robo-text, like it's like the volunteer text. Had robust mail, and the Crockett team just did not feel like they needed those things.
Also felt like they had different, if you just put aside everything else, like messaging, their bio, that they had competing theories of how to flip the state. And they're trying to say, like, I'm going to win and vote for me because I have this theory and I'm going to be the best candidate for that theory. What were those theories? And I'm wondering, how do you guys come down? Because ultimately, this is a podcast about flipping Texas. And so we want to flip Texas in the ledge. We want to flip Texas statewide. And so, like, how did you perceive both of their competing theories to flip the state, and which one do you believe is actually the winning theory?
I just wanted to add real quick before your the theories that I was redrawn into Texas 30. And so with Pastor Freddie Haynes, I'm actually tickled to death that that's going to be my new congressperson. Like thrilled, like ecstatic that that's going to be my new congressperson. So I just wanted to add that in there.
On the other hand, was redrawn out of a Democratic seat and am now represented by Lance Gooden.
Oh, well, you have a Democratic
wow.
runoff. And actually, I think that seat might be flippable this year, but we'll see. Okay, so theories. So the theories were that Jasmine Crockett could either get people who were like the low propensity voters to show up, meaning like people who are registered to vote, but just basically don't ever show up. And Talarico was the people who are independents or are disenchanted. So maybe like the Hispanic voters, like maybe actual swing voters. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like who he's talking to, like, some of the crazier people on our side are like when Talarico says it's not left versus right, is he saying, oh, is this going to be a coalition with us, me and you and all of the Nazis, or is it going to be a coalition with us and maybe like the independents or like the Hispanic voters who voted for Trump in 2020, but voted for Hillary in 2016, but voted for Obama in 2008 or whatever. Like, are those like really actually swing voters? Are Hispanic swing voters in Texas? That's a possibility. And I don't know which one of those work. I don't know which one of those work because I feel like we've tried them both in Texas. Like we've tried them both. We failed both, but it's a different year. It's a different message. It's a different candidate. So we'll see.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I mean, I know we mentioned like SDO9 earlier in the podcast, and Taylor Remitt won on his message, his vision, etc. But if you look at the electorate who voted in that special election runoff, essentially 1 out of every 2 voters had voted in a past Republican primary. Like even the Republican, consultants and data experts in Texas were, waving the freak out flags afterwards, saying like Remitt probably won, 10% plus of Trump voters who showed up, and he probably won close to 20% of past Republican primary voters. And so I think that is a good example of theory of the case that James Talarico was presenting. I think it's the more credible path out of the wilderness. In terms of what you talk about, how you talk about it, I think that is for debate. I think, Talarico running like an economic populist campaign while also, really throwing the Biden administration's failures on border security under the bus is a smart theory of how do you actually get these Texan voters to vote for you, by talking about cost and taking on corrupt interest, but then also, being a different type of Democrat than the ones that they hate in DC, like the average, voter in Texas. So is Talarico the one to deliver that victory in November? I think it's still, to be seen. I think it's still an uphill battle, but the theory of the case is valid. But obviously, we did see this huge surge of new primary voters in the Democratic primary in the state. Again, vast majority of them are past general election voters. Like they probably voted in the 2024 general. I actually haven't put those numbers in yet, but we know they voted in the past general elections in general, or, in overall, whether it be 20, 22, 24. We know that for a fact. And getting those people to vote in primaries is very hard, very impressive, but it's a different beast than going after registered voters who just don't vote at all. And getting those people is probably going to be a task too great to accomplish. And so going after like the Remitt strategy of winning over some of these disenchanted Trump voters, whoever they may be, disenchanted past Republican primary voters, generally they're going to be independents. They're not going to be, Republicans. Like that's a fool's errand. But these, moderate, center left, center right, ideologically idiosyncratic indies are who will deliver Texas for either
I
party.
think that's right. And something Taylor Remitt always said is that he wasn't running against Republicans. He was running on and for working class issues. And I think that's the model, at least when you look outside of Texas, the kind of people who win in places that Trump also wins, right? Like your governor, Andy Beshear from Kentucky, your senators, Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego, your senators, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, et cetera, Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan. It has nothing to do with race or gender. It's kind of like approach, right? And something we talk about a lot is that the Democratic Party brand is in the toilet right now, like shockingly, appallingly unpopular when it's polled. And we also at the same time are seeing, probably not unsurprisingly, the highest percentage on record of self-identification of independents. It's like 45% of the country identifies as independent, 27% each for Democrats and Republicans. And so I think any approach that just doubles down on I'm a Democrat loud and proud, or I'm just going to stick it to the Republicans, or I'm just going to stick it to Trump is not going to be a broad enough coalition. My personal bias, but putting it out there.
Alex has won me over on that point.
Good.
Well, leaving on a high note there, Alex, should we switch gears?
Yes. I think it's important, that we're not always so negative. As Texas Democrats in particular, we're the most negative bunch in the country. We need to have more optimism. We need to get more comfortable sharing good news in the sense of like the missions of Texas. People had to go and spread the gospel, share the good news. So something we like to do on our podcast is get that muscle, some reps. So what is something personally or professionally, anything in the world that you've seen, some good news you would like to share?
Good news, Alyssa Simmons won the judge's primary race, Democratic primary race for Tarrant County, which is my county. So that's the most exciting thing that's happened in all of Texas. So
she gets the honor of taking on Tim O'Hare.
She gets the honor of taking on Tim
Talked
O'Hare.
about this on our episode with the Tarrant County Democratic Party Chair, Allison Campolo.
From here until November, my number one campaign focus is not Talarico. It is Alyssa Simmons.
Yeah. So goes Tarrant, so goes the Texas, so goes the country, right?
Yes.
Yep. I will come out there and block walk against Tim O'Hare anytime. So
yes, because Timmy's got to go.
He does. David, you got any good news?
Yeah, this past weekend, I take my boys that are 3 and almost 2 years old to barbecue around the Dallas metro area frequently, trying new spots, going back to old favorites. We tried coffee barbecue out in Irving for the first time ever. It's it's from a pitmaster who's an Iraqi Texan. And you see it in some of the dishes, but it is like a good. It's a fun mixture of traditional brisket, but then like Iraqi inspired like sausages and some sides and all that kind of stuff. It's halal, so you see kind of the Irving or Northwest Dallas County Muslim community in there a lot as we were there for lunch, and it was really. I mean, quite frankly, inspiring and cool to see that kind of blending of traditional Texas culture being updated with some of the recent immigrant community that is becoming Texan, but enhancing what Texas means. And it was amazing. Like the pitmaster was like so proud, like going to like every table and asking folks what they thought of his food and the restaurant. And at a time when the country, because of the federal government, is really cracking down on immigrants and people that look like they might be immigrants, it was nice to experience something like that here in the Dallas area in Irving. The food was exceptional. Yeah.
I'm going to remember that. Well, Alex and I have some good news to share. We are finally opening up a Patreon. So that is a bit of a self-serving good news, but we are self-funded, we're independent, and we have opened up a Patreon account, and we already have a lot of members and supporters there. And so we ask our dear listeners, if you want to help us out a little bit, help pay our editor, Juan Jose, who we love dearly, also an immigrant, went to North Texas. We love him, and he's probably editing this right now. But if you'd like to help us defray the cost of this podcast, please join us over at Patreon and become a member over there, where you can, for $5 a month, become a member.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll just make my good news about spring break. I'm very excited. I've never been to Great Wolf Lodge before, but I'm taking the kids, and my best friend from law school and his family is going to join us as well. Fun fact, everybody, look forward to your next spring break or whenever you want to go to Great Wolf Lodge. If you book it out well in advance, you get like 50% off. And so I love it. I love a good deal. Very scrappy that way.
All right, well, that is our good news. Now we're going to wrap up into our last word. We give our guests the last word on what it's going to take to flip Texas. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but we are a long-form podcast talking about this long-term strategy to flip the state legislature, the statewide races, so that we can be prepared for the next census and the redistricting that we have coming down the pike. So we started with Michelle earlier. Maybe we'll start with David now. Like, what do you think that we need to be doing here, whether it's messaging, whether it's turnout, who we're turning out, what kind of candidates? Like, what do you think it will take to flip this state?
It will require Texas Democrats being willing to message to the types of voters that have become more open to voting Democratic in states like Georgia and Arizona, whether they be, the growing Latino or other immigrant community, or the influx of white voters moving from other parts of the country into the metro areas here in Texas. I think Texas Democrats, compared to a lot of other purple-ish, light red states, whatever you want to call it, are arguably a little skittish to talk to anyone other than who's already in our corner, in a way that a lot of our other state counterparts aren't. And I think doing so meaningfully is necessary to see significant movement in the state.
Michelle, what do you think?
To flip Texas, I think that we need all hands on deck. We need more precinct chairs for sure. We need messaging in every language, not just English and Spanish. We need multilingual messaging, Vietnamese, Chinese, like everything. We need every campaign working year-round, weekends, no days off. Like I said, we need all hands on deck.
I know we learned in many of our episodes that we have less than half of our state has precinct chairs. And it was made the case by John Turner, former representative, that we need to be messaging between campaigns, not just as we gear up for these primaries. So both very valid takes. So thank you for your last word. Thank you for joining us, David and Michelle. That's our wrap up of the primaries. I'm sure we're going to have many other episodes about the primaries as we are heading into the general election. But we thank both of our guests for joining us, and we will sign off by saying, God bless Texas.
You can follow us on all socials at Mission Texas Podcast. Email us at missiontexaspodcast@gmail.com. This episode is edited by Juan Jose Flores. Our music bumper is by Adam Pickerel, and our cover art is by Tina Sohn.